Hey guys, tonight we ease back the sands of time, not in a rush, not with drama, just with that faint hush that comes when the world's a little too tired to remember its own past. You're standing on the coastline of what is now Gaza. There's no border wall, no electricity pylons, not even a name yet, really. Just the briny smell of the sea, some huts clinging to the shoreline, and the occasional trader who mutters about the route to Egypt being too sandy. You probably won't survive this era, to be honest. If you don't get heat stroke, you might catch something from drinking water stored in goat bladders. Still, there's something kind of peaceful about it all. The early Bronze Age, around 3000 BCE, is a quiet sort of chaos. Farmers are settling, traders are passing through, and Gaza, though it doesn't know it yet, is already playing host to the first of many uninvited guests. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really helps me keep this sleepy time machine running. Oh, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin as part of a tribe who decided this small patch of coastal plain would be a decent place to settle. Not because it was luxurious, but because it was between other places that were. Gaza sat on the edge of two important regions. To the west, Egypt with its flashy pyramids and crocodile gods. To the east, Mesopotamia with its tablets and celestial obsessions. Naturally, Gaza became a place people passed through, argued over, and occasionally burned down. You walk through rows of barley, sandals squishing in irrigation ditches. Pottery shards lie in the dust. Clay bowls with geometric patterns that one day, thousands of years from now, someone will dig up and argue about in polite academic journals. You share bread with neighbors and gossip about traders who've come from Byblos, or who claim they've seen the Nile flood. The first real name Gaza likely had, Hazadi or Gazatu, starts popping up on ancient Egyptian and Akkadian tablets. It's a stop on the route from Africa to Asia, a dusty pin on the map that everyone seems to want, but no one seems to love. Historians still argue whether the early Canaanite people who lived here were more urbanized than their neighbors. Some think Gaza was just a big campsite with aspirations. Others see it as a functioning city with early governance and quite possibly the region's first overly enthusiastic bureaucrat. But even bureaucrats sleep eventually, and as centuries roll by, Gaza changes hands more often than a borrowed donkey. Around 2000 BCE, Egyptian influence really begins to shape the city. Hieroglyphs appear. So do copper tools. You see small altars to deities whose names you can't pronounce unless your tongue folds sideways. Trade intensifies. Timber from Lebanon, copper from Sinai, ivory from somewhere far away where the elephants definitely aren't local. At night, the stars hang heavy over the coast. The Mediterranean sighs in slow waves. The people of Gaza begin writing things down. Scratches on clay. Stories of gods, dreams, debts. You might imagine them whispering bedtime tales to their children. And then the great king of Uruk said no, so we traded goats instead. Of course, none of this is permanent. Nothing in Gaza ever is. That's sort of the theme. You might start to notice it, how the land is rich but not indulgent. How every temple is built with an eye on the horizon, as if everyone knows someone else will be coming soon. You wonder if it's the wind that carries these empires in, or the sea, Or maybe it's just geography, being useful without ever being safe. Still, for a while, life in ancient Gaza hums along. Cows low in the morning, children chase beetles by torchlight. A caravan arrives, selling some sort of fermented fish paste that is, tragically, quite popular. You sleep on rooftops when the air gets too thick inside the mud brick homes. And when the rains come, sparse but sincere, you gather and smile and pretend the clay walls don't leak as badly as they do. There's no electricity, no politics, just a place with stories piling up like driftwood. And somewhere in those stories, Gaza begins to make a name for itself. One that will last. One that people will fight over long after the barley fields are forgotten. You wake to the rumble of sandals, not just yours this time, but rows upon rows of Egyptian ones, filed neatly in military fashion. You rub your eyes, and the early sun glints off bronze helmets, plumes swaying like slow waves. Pharaoh's men have arrived, and they don't travel light. Chariots creak down narrow paths, and suddenly, sleepy Gaza is a pit stop for an empire that builds monuments taller than your wildest curses. It's somewhere around the 15th century BCE, and the Egyptians aren't here just for tourism. Gaza, you see, has become part of the Way of Horus, a military and trade highway connecting the Nile to the lands of Canaan and Syria. To the Egyptians, Gaza is their gate into Asia. To you, it's the place where soldiers argue about fish prices at the market. The locals adjust, as they always do. Some start wearing linen like the Egyptians, adopting their strange makeup and words. Others mutter about identity and cling tighter to older gods. But Pharaoh Thutmose III doesn't care much. He just needs a reliable outpost, a dusty waypoint from which to launch campaigns north. And Gaza, ever obliging, becomes a launch pad. Still, there's more trade than trouble at first. You stand by a caravan as it unloads copper ingots shaped like ox hides. You help a merchant haggle over lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, though let's be honest, it's probably just blue-glazed clay. In return, Gaza exports olive oil, wine, and that particularly pungent fish sauce that somehow made it into 3 separate empires. You watch Egyptian scribes in tall white kilts tally rations under palm trees. They're here to manage things, which means building a lot of storehouses and sending a lot of reports back to Memphis. You offer one a fig, and he refuses, politely, but firmly, like someone afraid of figs or of foreign hospitality. You suspect his sandals are too tight, but not everything is boots and bureaucracy. Gaza starts absorbing Egyptian culture like sand-soaking wine. Temples go up, art changes. The locals still worship Baal and Anat, but someone adds Osiris to the mix, just in case. Egyptian gods are oddly well-traveled. There's one carving, barely visible now, of a crocodile god devouring a thief in the afterlife while bureaucrats look on. You wonder if it was meant to be a threat or a comedy. Of course, historians still argue whether Egypt directly ruled Gaza or simply exerted influence through loyal local rulers. The evidence is sketchy. Some scarabs, some inscriptions, and a few bored-looking statues. What's clear is that Egyptian control came in waves. Sometimes strong, sometimes distant, always bureaucratically thorough. Meanwhile, you lounge on a rooftop and listen to the sounds of an empire trying to be tidy. Chickens cluck. Distant drums signal tax collection. A child names their doll Pharaoh and demands tribute and raisins. But empires don't last forever. not even the ones that build pyramids with stones stolen from gods. By the 12th century BCE, Egyptian control weakens. A mix of sea raiders, political chaos, and internal collapse sends Egypt staggering back toward the Nile like a party guest who stayed too long. Gaza, left half set, half finished, once again becomes a prize without a master. The trade routes still pass through, but now they're a little more dangerous. Bandits crop up. So do new arrivals. You sense it before you see it. Ships on the horizon, sleek and unfamiliar. A new people are coming ashore, and they're loud, heavily armed, and fond of pork. The Egyptians are leaving. The Philistines are coming. And Gaza, poor Gaza, once again forgets what peace was supposed to feel like. You crouch behind a heap of baskets, pretending to be interested in dates, but your eyes are fixed on the harbor. The sails on the incoming ships are thick, striped, and unsettlingly stylish. The people climbing out of them don't look like traders. They look like they came to stay, and possibly redecorate violently. It's around 1150 BCE, and the Philistines are arriving. Now, you've heard of them, though probably not kindly. Most later sources call them uncultured, pig-loving, and resistant to good architecture. But that's just propaganda. Up close, they seem complicated. Loud, yes. Fashionable, surprisingly. And definitely not shy about building new homes on top of whatever ruins are available. They settle along the southern Levant coast, and Gaza becomes one of their main cities, part of the famed Philistine Pentapolis, alongside Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. Each city rules itself, but they're like bickering siblings, trading, rivaling, occasionally borrowing too much barley and not returning it. You walk past a newly raised temple, dedicated to Dagon, their half-man, half-fish deity who looks like he lost a bet with Poseidon. It smells faintly of roasted grain and indecision. Historians still argue whether Dagon was primarily an agricultural god or a fish god, which tells you just how weird his press kit must have been. The Philistines, despite their bad PR, bring quite a bit to Gaza. You spot Mycenaean-style pottery, with birds and spirals, iron tools that seem ahead of their time, and a lot of pork bones. That last one's a clue. While other cultures in the region viewed pigs with suspicion or outright prohibition, the Philistines embraced them like long-lost cousins. Barbecue is back in style. The locals notice. Some adopt Philistine customs, others grumble and mutter about those noisy coastal people. You, ever adaptable, try the pork stew. It's fine, but the seasoning could use work. Gaza grows, streets become busier, fortifications go up, and the Philistines start butting heads with a rising power to the east, the Israelites. You've heard the stories, the kind that get repeated too often around nighttime fires. Samson, the strong man with the worst dating history in Bronze Age lore, features heavily in Gaza's next chapter. You pass a gate one day, and someone whispers, "He carried this off on his back, you know." You nod, though you're not entirely convinced. In the version that survived in texts, Samson comes to Gaza, tears down the city gates in a fit of romantic spite, and later dies collapsing a Philistine temple. Whether this happened or not, the tale stuck. The moral? Never trust a man whose haircut determines his strength. There's a grim humor to it. Gaza becomes, in this period, a city of contradictions, stronghold and victim, urbanized but unstable, and always, always on someone else's map as a strategic must-have. Still, life goes on. You sit on a terrace drinking date wine, watching children chase goats. You overhear merchants arguing over Cypriot copper prices. There's a stability to the city, even if it's the kind that trembles under the surface. The Philistine culture matures. They mint coins, organize governance, and write things down, though, annoyingly, not in any script we've fully deciphered yet. Thanks, guys. Makes things fun for future archaeologists. One day, while helping unload amphorae at the docks, you hear rumors. A new empire is stirring. From the east comes talk of Assyrians, towering, brutal, fond of siege engines and sculpted beards. You sigh, just when things were starting to settle. You've learned this by now. Gaza is never still for long. It's a hallway with too many doors, a prize in a game where the rules keep changing. The Philistines dig in. You see fortifications reinforced. Priests consult omens. Scribes record inventory with shaking hands. And you? You refill your wine cup and stare at the sea, because you know it's coming. Again. You're wiping dust from your sandals when you hear shouting. Again. But it's not a raid or an invasion this time. It's romance? Well, sort of. The story goes that a man with arms like tree trunks has fallen for a local woman. Not an unusual tale, unless the man in question happens to be Samson, and the woman, Delilah, knows how to use scissors. Welcome back to Gaza, sometime between the 11th and 10th centuries BCE, where legend and real estate overlap. You watch from a shaded doorway as older women gossip about Samson's latest visit. He was seen at the gates again, one mutters, carried them off last time. You sip pomegranate juice and pretend not to listen. Samson is a walking riddle. A Nazirite from the Israelite tribe of Dan, sworn not to cut his hair or drink wine, yet often found breaking both rules with casual flair. He visits Gaza, supposedly to see a woman of questionable repute, and the local Philistine rulers try to trap him. Bad idea. He tears off the city gates and walks off with them. Legend says he carries them all the way to Hebron. Historians still argue whether the tale is literal, symbolic, or just ancient smack talk. And then there's the big finish. According to biblical lore, the Philistines eventually capture Samson, after Delilah extracts the secret of his strength with a combination of nagging and excellent timing. They blind him, mock him, and chain him between two pillars in a temple dedicated to Dagon. You find yourself standing there one morning, staring at two cracked stone columns. Is this the place? Someone asks. No one really knows. Maybe it's just a market now, but you can almost hear the creak of stone above, the whisper of prayer, the silence before a man pushed. It's the stuff of epic bedtime stories, but beneath the drama lies something more fragile. Gaza, even in myth, is never really the villain. It's the stage, the arena where cultures clash, heroes fall, and gods are tested. In quieter moments, you see what Gaza really is during this time. A bustling city with fortified walls, temples, and vibrant trade. You pass black and red Philistine pottery, its curves telling stories older than the words themselves. You see looms in courtyards, fishmongers shouting beneath sun-dried awnings, scribes hunched over clay tablets with waxy frowns. You hear languages, Canaanite dialects, Philistine tongues, maybe even early Hebrew, blending like a soup. Nobody fully understands, but everyone agrees needs more salt. One afternoon, a merchant hands you a strange necklace carved from bone. It's lucky, he says. You wear it, not because you believe him, but because Gaza seems like the kind of place where you'll need all the luck you can get. There's tension in the air, though. You feel it during quiet meals. You see it in the way guards linger near the gates. The Israelites, once scattered tribes, are beginning to unify. Saul is rising. David isn't far behind. And the Philistines? Well, their heyday is starting to fray at the edges. Gaza endures, but its place in the regional spotlight dims slightly. Other cities rise. Gath becomes more prominent militarily. Ashdod handles religion. Gaza holds the coast and watches the horizon like it always has. It rains once in the fall, and the mud in the streets smells faintly of fish and old ambition. You lean against a wall and wonder if the city will ever get a break. But deep down, you know the answer. It won't. Because everyone always wants Gaza, and no one ever keeps it for long. The streets are quieter now. The feasts have thinned out. You notice it most when you pass the old marketplace, where once you heard 3 dialects bickering over barley. Now there's just one old man grumbling to a goat. You might think Gaza is finally catching its breath, but really it's holding it. It's the 6th century BCE, and you feel the weight of Babylon in the air. To the east, a storm is rising in the form of Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon's famously grumpy, architecture-loving monarch. He's already flattened Jerusalem. Now his eyes turn west. Gaza lies right on the path of empire again. You walk the walls and see workers patching up towers with the kind of weary resignation that only comes from having done it before, maybe too many times. Traders whisper that Babylonian envoys have been spotted nearby, taking notes, measuring distances, frowning at maps like they're insulted by how small Gaza looks. Then the siege begins. No one talks much during sieges. You just sit, wait, and count the days by how often the stew changes consistency. Gaza's defenders hold out longer than anyone expected. Weeks, maybe months. But Babylon is patient, and its engines are loud. Eventually, the city falls. The records are vague, probably on purpose. There's no epic tale here. No gate-lifting strongman or flaming chariots. Just the quiet crunch of sandals over ash, the soft weeping of a market girl staring at what used to be her home. Still, Gaza doesn't vanish. Cities like this don't go quietly. They linger. They reassemble themselves like stubborn puzzle pieces. Under Babylonian control, Gaza becomes a provincial outpost. You see administrators with trimmed beards and meticulously inked tablets. They try to make the city useful again. Trade resumes slowly. Olives, fish, bronze tools. Life crawls back. You visit the scribal quarter and watch a young Babylonian apprentice write the same word over and over. Tribute. You wonder if he even knows what it means, or if he's just trying not to smudge the ink. Yet, amid all the empire building, something stranger happens. Gaza becomes a place of exile. After Jerusalem's destruction, many Judeans are taken east to Babylon, but some pass through Gaza, or even settle near it. You hear unfamiliar songs on the wind, psalms whispered under breath, words that taste like homesickness. One scribe carves a small phrase into stone near the harbor. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept. Gaza isn't Babylon, of course, but it's close enough to feel like the waiting room. Historians still argue whether this period was one of ruin or quiet growth. Some say Gaza flourished modestly under Babylonian rule, taking on a more cosmopolitan tone. Others argue it was a shell of its former self, surviving, but only just. You sit one evening watching the stars blink above the darkened port. Somewhere in the distance, a reed flute plays the same note 3 times too many, and then gives up. Gaza sleeps, but it's a restless sleep, not the deep slumber of peace, but the shallow doze of someone who knows they'll be woken soon. And sure enough, in the silence, you hear hooves. Another empire is coming. Again. You stand beside a dusty road watching a man in a ridiculous hat ride past on a horse that clearly regrets everything. He's got a leather satchel, a determined frown, and he doesn't stop, not even for your polite wave. He's a royal courier of the Persian Empire, and he's on a schedule. It's now the 5th century BCE. Babylon has fallen. Cyrus the Great has marched in with more grace and less fire than expected. And Gaza, yet again, changes hands. No fanfare, just new uniforms and different tax policies. You might think this would cause a stir, but honestly, the people of Gaza have gotten good at transitions. They repaint the same city walls, rewrite tax records in cuneiform and Aramaic, and carry on. The Philistines have faded into cultural memory. The Babylonians are a footnote. Now the Persians are here, and you get the sense they might actually stick around longer than usual. They're not flashy, they're functional. You walk through the streets and see small administrative offices blooming like bureaucratic mushrooms. Persian governors, or satraps, bring a strange sense of calm. Roads are maintained, markets are taxed, but not looted. You almost miss the drama. What the Persians bring to Gaza, more than anything else, is infrastructure. They incorporate the city into their famed royal road system, a relay-style network of couriers, messengers, and officials that lets the great king communicate across continents. That rider you saw earlier, he's one of thousands, galloping through dust storms and donkey herds just to deliver letters nobody ever reads aloud. Still, it works. You hear news from Susa, from Sardis, even from Persepolis. You know about rebellions before the rebels do. Information flows. So does tribute. You pass a tax booth where a tired collector is debating whether a basket of eels counts as proper currency. He decides yes, and then immediately regrets it. You can't blame him. It's noon, and the eels are warm. But Gaza isn't just a post office in a desert. Under the Persians, it thrives modestly. Trade with Arabia picks up. Spices, incense, and the occasional confused camel that wanders into someone's garden. Ships from Egypt dock with linen and papyrus. Greek merchants arrive, speak too loudly, and overpay for fish. You climb to a lookout one evening and watch the sun drip into the sea like molten copper. It's quiet. The city doesn't feel threatened. It feels institutionalized, managed. You wonder if this is peace or just a well-oiled lull. The Persians don't impose Zoroastrianism, their state religion, but you see signs of it. Fire altars tucked in corners, sacred fires that never go out. Priests who talk a lot about truth and lie as if they're ingredients in soup. Most locals stick with older gods. Dagon's shrines are overgrown, but Baal still gets offerings, and there's a niche following for a storm god, who may or may not also be a cactus. Historians still argue how Persianized Gaza became. Some say the city adapted fully to the Achaemenid administration, with officials and scribes trained in imperial protocols. Others think Gaza remained a regional oddity, a quiet port on the fringe, more loyal to its past than to Persepolis. Either way, you don't see many soldiers, just scribes. That's how you know things are calm, or at least slow. But slow doesn't mean eternal. You sense it again, like a drop in pressure, or the pause before thunder. A new name is beginning to echo across the eastern hills. Not a god, not a king, a young Macedonian with a fast horse and a thirst for legacy. You'll learn his name soon enough. But for now, the fire altars flicker, the sea is still, and Gaza waits. You hear him before you see him, a distant cheer, somewhere between admiration and fear. Then hooves, so many hooves, and dust thick enough to chew. By the time the noise reaches Gaza's gates, you already know. Alexander is here. It's 332 BCE, and Gaza is about to make the worst first impression. You've seen many invaders come through this city, but none quite like him. Alexander of Macedon is young, fast, and fueled by more ambition than is strictly healthy. He's just rolled through Egypt, been declared a god, and now he wants Gaza. Not as a souvenir, he wants it as a symbol. A firm little dot on the map that says, yes, I conquered everything, even that stubborn coastal town. You'd think Gaza would just open the gates and offer him a snack. But no, the Persian-appointed governor, Batiz, decides to dig in. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's orders, maybe he's just not a fan of Greek architecture. Regardless, the siege begins, and it drags. Gaza's fortifications, recently reinforced and perfectly inconvenient, hold strong. Alexander's forces are frustrated. Siege engines are hauled in. Ladders collapse. Arrows fly. You crouch in a cellar, counting the number of days your olive stash will last, and wondering why no one ever just writes Gaza a nice letter instead. 3 months. That's how long it takes. Alexander is not amused. When the city finally falls, it's messy. Not the kind of cinematic battle with noble speeches and orchestral backing, more like a trampled market and broken doorways. Gaza burns in places, screams echo off old walls, and Bacchus. He's famously tied to a chariot and dragged around the city. You try not to watch. You fail. You regret it. But as with every empire before, the rage fades and the paperwork begins. Alexander installs new governors. Greek becomes the language of power. You see new coins, new names, and statues of deities with impressive abs. Oddly enough, Gaza begins to Hellenize fast. Maybe it's survival instinct. Maybe it's because Greek wine really is better. You visit a small library where someone's translating old Canaanite poetry into Ionian verse. The meter's off, but the passion holds. You pass theaters, actual theaters, where tragic comedies are staged, featuring actors in masks who gesture dramatically about goats and lost love. You clap politely. Even religion adapts. Local gods are blended with Greek ones. Dagon quietly retires. Apollo takes over the sun. You find a coin with Heracles on one side and a symbol that looks suspiciously like Baal's thunderbolt on the other. The fusion is awkward but charming, like a toga worn over a tunic. Historians still argue whether Gaza flourished or floundered during the Hellenistic period. Some say it became a prosperous cultural hub. Others think it was a backwater with fancy columns. You think it was both. A city that wore its scars under perfume. And yet, even now, peace doesn't quite settle. Alexander doesn't stay long. He has more world to conquer, after all. He dies young in Babylon, and suddenly the empire is up for grabs. The Seleucids take over, followed by the Ptolemies, then the Seleucids again. Gaza swaps rulers like a bored cat playing with dice. Each one leaves its mark. You wake up some mornings unsure which dynasty you technically belong to. You shrug and drink your morning wine anyway. One evening, you climb to a rooftop and gaze out toward the horizon. The sea is still. The stars blink in slow approval. And below you, Gaza breathes in, breathes out, and prepares, always, for the next arrival. Because someone is coming. They always are. You blink against the sunlight bouncing off freshly paved stones. They've finally finished the new Roman road, and, credit where it's due, it's smooth enough to nap on. Not that you'd try, of course. The donkeys are reckless, and the carts don't stop. It's now the 1st century BCE, and Gaza has joined the club no one can really avoid, the Roman Empire. You didn't even notice it at first. There were local kings, client rulers, the historians call them. Herod the Great passed through, smiling too widely, throwing coins and building theaters like someone compensating for a short fuse. But eventually, the togas arrive for real. Legions, architects, tax collectors. Rome doesn't knock. It installs plumbing. To your surprise, Gaza adapts again. The Greeks may have brought columns and comedies, but the Romans bring structure, literal and political. You stroll down paved roads flanked by shaded colonnades, and the smell of roasting chickpeas follows you from market to market. The city's layout changes. New forums spring up. Public baths arrive, complete with heated floors and stone benches that are somehow always damp. You go once, sit awkwardly in a room full of sweaty senators and chatty merchants, and decide the steam room is not your thing. Still, it's hard to ignore the sense of order. Gaza, under Rome, becomes a key stop along the incense route, the overland path that delivers spices, perfumes, and the kind of exotic goods that make Roman nobles feel important. Frankincense from Arabia came through Gaza, myrrh, same. So did ideas, gossip, and the occasional fugitive philosopher. One morning, a man from Nabatea sells you a tiny flask of perfume that smells like overripe dates and camel leather. You're not sure if it's divine or horrifying. You wear it anyway. Religiously, things are getting crowded. Pagan temples still stand. Some Greeks still toast Dionysus in private. But quietly, beneath the surface, something is shifting. You pass a courtyard where a few people gather, whispering words from a strange book written in Greek, but filled with Hebrew rhythms. The Jesus movement is spreading, slowly, cautiously. In Gaza, early Christian communities form, blending into the daily bustle like hidden melodies under the market's noise. You overhear a debate near the fish stalls, something about resurrection, sandals, and whether the Messiah would have preferred olives or dates. You don't join in. The fish smells too strong. By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, Christianity starts winning hearts and real estate. Pagan temples are repurposed. Bishops replace magistrates in public processions. Gaza, once a place of layered gods, starts centering itself around one. But the transition isn't smooth. The old elite resist. Philosophers grumble. One angry old man calls it spiritual gentrification. You nod politely and move away before he starts quoting Plato. Still, Gaza flourishes. You walk under marble arches. You buy scrolls from a scribe who swears one of them belonged to Origen, the famous theologian. You don't believe him, but his ink smells expensive. By now, the city's built up layers like sediment, Hellenistic bones under Roman muscle, wrapped in a Christian tunic. And yet, you notice something timeless remains. The way the breeze moves through the alleys, the way cats own every wall, the way merchants still oversell raisins like they're made of gold. Historians still argue whether Gaza's Christian era was a golden age or a flickering candle. What's clear is that for a time, things were stable. The city grew, churches rose, scholars debated how many angels could dance on a date seed. You pause at a public square one evening. Children play by a fountain. Someone reads aloud from the Psalms, his voice low and rhythmic, like a lullaby laced with theology. And for once, you almost believe the quiet might last. But it won't. Because to the east, under the rising moon, a new crescent is forming. And it's not just the tide that's changing. You wake to a different kind of morning prayer. There's no Latin chanting, no incense curling out of old basilicas. Instead, it's Arabic, measured, melodic, and echoing softly from a distant hill. You wrap your cloak tighter as the call to prayer hums through the dawn. Gaza, once again, has changed hands. It's the 7th century CE, and Islam has arrived. You watched it unfold in slow waves. First came the whispers, Arab armies moving north, fast and efficient, led by commanders with names like Khalid and Amr. Then came the real movement. Gaza, once a Byzantine stronghold and Christian hub, finds itself part of the expanding Rashidun Caliphate. No fanfare, no burning temples, just treaties, tax codes, and new governors with strong beards and calm eyes. And surprisingly, the transition isn't violent. The people of Gaza, used to being rebranded every few centuries, adjust quickly. Christians remain, Jews remain. The new Muslim leaders allow local customs to continue, so long as taxes are paid and no rebellions are stirred. You attend a meeting in the town square where the new administrator calmly explains tax brackets with the patience of someone who has explained them many times before. Someone drops their figs. No one cares. Arabic replaces Greek in the markets. Slowly, then suddenly. You hear merchants fumbling through new phrases, children playing games that involve shouting Allahu Akbar before throwing date pits, and scribes adjusting their scrolls to face a slightly different direction. One day, you're invited to a mosque. It's new, built on the foundations of something older, like everything else in Gaza. There's no iconography, just clean lines, cool stone, and soft carpets. You sit, listen, and notice how quiet the space is, how still. It's a different kind of sacred, but sacred nonetheless. Islam takes root, gently but thoroughly. Gaza becomes a small but significant node in the early Islamic world, trading, praying, surviving. The Umayyads rule first, followed by the Abbasids. Caliphs come and go, their names stamped into coins you never quite get used to. Still, life goes on. You visit a new library funded by a local scholar. It's filled with works in Arabic, Persian, and even translated Greek philosophy. One scroll tries to explain Aristotle using camels as metaphors. It works better than you'd think. The markets are bustling again. Spices from Yemen, paper from Egypt, indigo from India. Gaza is still not a capital, not a crown jewel, but it's dependable, a waypoint, a pause, a place where caravans rest, ideas cross paths, and history takes a sip of tea before moving on. You meet a Sufi mystic who tells you, with alarming cheer, that time is a spiral, and Gaza is one of its quieter loops. You nod, unsure if it's profound or just heat stroke. Historians still argue how integrated Gaza was into the Islamic empires. Some say it was a sleepy province. Others claim it played a key role in intellectual and religious networks stretching from Mecca to Baghdad. Truth is, probably both. Gaza always lived in the in-between. Over time, the minarets multiply. So do gardens. You watch families tend citrus groves and rose beds behind mud brick walls. Poetry is recited in courtyards. Someone paints Quranic verses on the sides of a grain silo. It's crooked, but heartfelt. And yet, even this era of slow, stable continuity won't last forever. Because one day, you notice the sky looks darker. Not from clouds, but from the banners coming in over the eastern hills. They don't chant in Arabic, they chant in Latin, again. And they've brought crosses, swords, and a suspicious number of siege ladders. You smell the iron before you see it, hot metal, oil, and that faint tang of tension that always comes before a siege. You know the scent too well by now. You've lived through Egyptians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and caliphs, and now here they come, crusaders, boots caked in road dust and theology. It's the 12th century CE, and Gaza is back in the crosshairs. The First Crusade has already turned Jerusalem into a holy fortress. The knights have built kingdoms with borrowed swords and righteous paperwork. And now they want Gaza, not for wine, not for olives, not even for trade, but for strategy, because Gaza controls the road between Jerusalem and Egypt. And in medieval logistics, that's gold. You stand on the battlements as Crusader forces arrive. They look tired. They've probably argued all morning over who gets to be called Lord of the Ramparts. Their banners flap noisily. Their accents collide like armored goats. Some ride with pride, others with the awkward fear of men who've only recently learned to ride. At first, the Crusaders don't conquer Gaza directly. Instead, they dance around it, building fortresses nearby, castles like Blanchgard and Ghibelline. You visit one during a lull in fighting. It's got pointy towers, excellent stonework, and guards who complain about the lentil stew. You leave unimpressed. Eventually, in 1150, Baldwin III of Jerusalem captures Gaza and builds a fortress of his own, right on top of the old city center. You watch as stone is hauled in, ditches are dug, and Latin chants echo where call to prayer once rose. A church goes up. So do the taxes. But the Crusaders don't stay long. Saladin is coming. You can feel it in the wind. A certain discipline in the air, the calm before a well-organized counterattack. Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, recaptures Gaza in 1187. The Christian fortress is taken. Most of the Latin knights retreat. A few surrender and take up gardening. You nod at one trying to grow grapes in sand. He waves back with quiet shame. Gaza returns to Muslim control, this time under the Ayyubid dynasty. But the cycle doesn't end. Control swings like a pendulum. Crusaders retake it briefly, then lose it again. One knight carves his name into a stone bench before leaving. It's misspelled. The people of Gaza adapt, as always. Churches become mosques. Fortresses become garrisons. You walk past a bakery and see a Christian baker teaching a Muslim apprentice how to braid bread. Nobody says anything. The bread is good. Still, the chaos takes a toll. Gaza shrinks. Walls crumble. Trade falters. What once was a regional hub becomes more of a crossroads without a map. You pass houses boarded up, fountains clogged with dry leaves, a pigeon nesting in a niche that once held a saint's statue. Historians still argue how important Gaza was during the Crusader period. Some call it a military outpost of minor consequence. Others point to its recurring sieges as proof that it was always on someone's mind, if not in someone's heart. One thing is clear: it never got a break. Even when rulers changed, the people mostly stayed the same. Bakers, shepherds, stonemasons, patching roofs and trading goods under whatever flag happened to be flying that week. One evening, you walk to the old wall. The sun sets behind broken battlements. You hear children playing Crusaders and Saracens with wooden sticks, laughing without malice. A girl rides a donkey past and sings a verse from both the Quran and a psalm in the same breath. No one corrects her. Gaza endures, but it's tired. And just when it seems like it might finally sleep, you hear the slow thump of marching feet again, new conquerors in old armor. Because history never calls once. It knocks and knocks and knocks. You don't notice the shift at first, just a different style of turban, a new kind of script on the market stalls, and slightly more elaborate mustaches. But then you see the flag, red with a crescent. The Ottomans have arrived. It's the early 16th century, and Gaza is folded, gently, almost absent-mindedly, into the sprawling Ottoman Empire. No siege this time. No flaming ladders or thunderous proclamations, just a quiet transfer of paperwork and the occasional polite decapitation in the background. You find this oddly refreshing. The Mamluks, who held Gaza before, ruled with flair and frequent cavalry. Their time is over. The Ottomans, led by the ever-efficient Selim Warash, move in with spreadsheets, accountants, and an almost suspicious interest in census data. Gaza is now part of the Vilayah of Damascus, and soon part of the Sanjak of Gaza. You watch a scribe unfurl a massive scroll containing tax codes for soap, goats, and, most confusingly, window shutters. The man looks tired, but he's proud of the categories. You give him a polite nod. He offers you a receipt for no reason. Oddly enough, the Ottomans don't transform Gaza so much as freeze it in time. It becomes what historians like to call provincial, which is a kind way of saying not a capital, not wealthy, but useful enough not to forget. You walk the streets and see the signs. Mosques built with reused Crusader stones, schools teaching law and Quranic studies, sleepy courts where the most exciting dispute is about a stolen sheep. There's a local governor, of course, a mutasarrif, who governs like a man waiting for retirement. He hosts tea ceremonies more often than inspections, and still, life goes on. You pass gardens where orange trees bloom. You smell cardamom in morning coffee. Merchants still grumble over dates and copper. Fishermen still argue with seagulls. Children chase shadows through ruined fortresses that no one remembers how to repair. One day, you follow a quiet road to an Islamic college, built by a man named Ridwan Pasha, part of the Ridwan dynasty that will govern Gaza for generations. His descendants rule with a strange mixture of poetry and tax forms. Under their care, Gaza experiences a flicker of prosperity. Bathhouses are repaired, walls touched up, markets made orderly. You hear a scholar deliver a lecture on astronomy, using a watermelon as a model for the cosmos. It makes sense somehow. And yet, the grandeur never quite returns. Gaza is sleepy now, sometimes dusty, sometimes dreamy. Caravans pass through on the way to somewhere else. Pilgrims stop to rest, then move on. It's as if the city has accepted its role, not the lead actor, but a dependable supporting character in the play of empires. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans neglected Gaza or preserved it. Some claim the city was ignored, left to decay while the empire focused on grander prizes. Others suggest Gaza was gently cradled, its culture maintained, its peace protected by distance and disinterest. You walk by the sea one evening and see ships at anchor, modest ones, fat with cloth and sesame oil. The docks aren't bustling, but they're alive. A cat naps on a coil of rope. A sailor sings in Turkish, off-key but heartfelt. The sun sets behind the domes. The muezzin's voice rises again, still the same prayer you heard centuries ago, but softer now, more weary. And then, one morning, a new sound. Steam, metal, the faint whistle of something too modern to be safe. A new century is coming, and it's bringing trains. You've never seen a train before. Gaza hasn't either. But there it is, a snorting, hissing monster of iron and smoke, crawling across the sand like it forgot it wasn't supposed to. Children scream with delight. Goats panic. One old man throws a shoe at it. Welcome to the British Mandate. It's the early 20th century now, and the Ottomans are gone, swept away by war, revolts, and too many treaties with the wrong people. The British have taken over, with their boots, bureaucracy, and a remarkable ability to serve lukewarm tea in every situation. You watch British officers disembark from their trucks like they're expecting applause. They're dressed for India, confused by Palestine, and perpetually sunburned. They build railways, telegraph lines, and military outposts. Gaza becomes a node again, strategically dull, logistically useful. It started with World War I. You remember the sound of artillery before anything else. The British trying to wrest Gaza from the Ottomans in not one, not two, but three major battles. The first two failed miserably. The third finally succeeded in 1917, thanks to General Allenby, an exceptionally stern man with a deep love of maps. You walk through the aftermath, collapsed walls, cratered streets, camels stealing unattended rations. Locals sweep up shattered tiles while soldiers argue over which direction Jerusalem is. Gaza is battered, but breathing. Under British rule, everything changes and nothing does. New laws are written. English signs appear. Arabic newspapers grumble politely. Schools teach a little more Shakespeare, a little less Quran. A British officer tries to install a cricket field. It becomes a goat enclosure. Still, there's a strange energy in the air. You feel it in the markets, see it in the newspapers. Whispers of independence, nationalism, identity. The Ottoman fog is lifting, and people are remembering they're not just residents of a province. They're Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and soon, something else entirely. You attend a town meeting where someone stands up and asks, "Whose country is this now?" No one answers. Not really. In the meantime, the British hold on. Trains run, roads are paved. But the British Empire is tired, stretched too thin, increasingly aware that the 20th century won't be as patient as the last one. And then, of course, there's the other question hanging over everything. The Zionist movement. Jewish immigration to Palestine has begun in earnest. Some Jews return from Europe with hope, some with trauma. They buy land, build farms, establish communities. In Gaza, the tension rises slowly, like steam under a sealed pot. Arab Palestinians wonder what's happening. Some worry, some welcome, some resist. You watch two farmers argue at a roadside cafe. One Arab, one Jewish, both tired. They complain about taxes, weather, and the price of grain. The argument turns, pauses, and becomes a conversation. Then someone else shouts, and the moment's gone. Historians still argue whether the British did too much or too little. Some say they encouraged division with their policies. Others say they tried to hold back a tide they barely understood. Either way, Gaza is caught in the middle. Again. You walk through its streets, still dusty, still half-ruined, still beautiful in ways no map can record. You see children reading Arabic poetry under oil lamps. You see British patrols march past ancient wells. You hear lullabies in 3 languages. And then, just as you start to believe Gaza might adjust to the 20th century, the century speeds up. A new war is coming. This one bigger than the last, louder, more final. And when it ends, the world will look at Gaza not as a waypoint, but as a problem. The flags go up before the ink is dry. It's 1948, and everything in Gaza feels temporary, except the grief. The British are leaving, packing up maps and furniture, with the quiet haste of a guest overstaying their welcome. Behind them, they leave a question no one is ready to answer. Who belongs here now? You hear it in the crackle of radios. You see it in the eyes of neighbors. The UN has just voted to partition Palestine, carving it into Arab and Jewish states. Jerusalem would be international. Gaza, well, Gaza gets nothing. Again. And so, the fighting begins. You feel it first in the silence, markets that don't open, children kept inside, men staring too long at the horizon. Then comes the exodus. Thousands of Palestinians flee from cities and villages now inside the borders of the new state of Israel. They come to Gaza by foot, by cart, by sheer force of panic. Overnight, Gaza's population triples. The city, already worn thin by wars and mandates, now struggles to house the displaced. Tents go up, then more tents, then more. By year's end, Gaza has become a strip, 21 miles long, a few miles wide, and bursting with people who don't know if they'll ever go home again. You walk through the refugee camps, Beit Hanun, Rafah, Jabalia. Children chase soccer balls made from rags. Mothers cook over shared fires. Old men sit beside fences and stare past the barbed wire as if it might blink first. The Egyptian army steps in, and Gaza is placed under Egyptian administration. Not annexed, not claimed, just managed. You hear officials call it temporary. You hear that word so often, it starts to sound like the name of the place itself. There is no independence, no statehood, just waiting. UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, is established to care for the displaced. You watch international aid workers arrive with clipboards, blankets, and good intentions. Some stay, others leave quickly. Gaza is not kind to anyone's schedule. And still, life continues. You meet a school teacher in a makeshift classroom. She teaches math using bottle caps. She tells her students they are the future, even though she doesn't believe it today. Her chalkboard is a painted shipping crate. You hear stories of villages left behind, Some of the refugees still carry their keys, not for utility, just for memory. They show them to you like relics. This one, a man says, opened my father's door. He puts it back in his pocket like a prayer. Historians still argue whether Gaza in the 1950s was a place of resilience or ruin. Some see in its crowded alleys the early shape of Palestinian identity. Others see only a wound that was never allowed to close. Tension builds. Cross-border raids erupt, sometimes by militants, sometimes by desperate refugees. Israel responds with force. Egypt responds with fortifications. You feel the land tightening, as if the very sand wants to scream. Then comes 1956, the Suez Crisis. Israel, Britain, and France launch a coordinated attack on Egypt after Nasser nationalizes the Suez Canal. Israeli forces sweep into Gaza. The fighting is brief, brutal, and bewildering. You hear gunfire in the morning, and by afternoon, there are tanks parked beside date palms. Civilians flee. Some hide. Some don't survive. International pressure forces Israel to withdraw, and Egypt returns to administrate. But nothing goes back to normal. The camps remain. The tension simmers. Gaza is no longer a crossroads. It's a cage. One evening, you sit atop a sand dune and watch the lights flicker in a camp below. Someone plays an oud. Someone else argues about wheat prices. A child draws a map in the sand, labeling places they've never seen with perfect clarity. You realize then, this isn't temporary. It never was. The wires go up before the sun does. You see them strung along the horizon, barbed, electrified, sharp enough to hum with the morning wind. Gaza, already small, begins to shrink in spirit. It's 1967 now, and the region has reached another boiling point. Except this time, no one's pretending it'll simmer down. The Six-Day War starts fast and ends faster. Israel launches a preemptive strike. In less than a week, it seizes the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, and Gaza. You hear the jets before you see them, then the tanks, grinding in over sand that remembers better things. Egyptian forces flee. Some fight, some don't make it, and just like that, Gaza is occupied. Not administered, not annexed, occupied. The word settles heavy on everything: walls, signs, breath. Israeli military governors take charge. Curfews begin. New checkpoints sprout like weeds. The old streets of Gaza City are suddenly filled with the soft, sharp click of boots not made for these alleys. Some try to resist. Most try to adjust. You watch a man repaint his shop sign to Hebrew and Arabic. He doesn't change the prices. He just waits to see who shows up. For a while, life hangs on. Israel allows some commerce, even encourages labor. Thousands of Gazans begin working in Israel, crossing checkpoints in the early morning, returning late. It becomes routine, but routines born of occupation don't build peace. They just delay tension. The camps still swell. The children born there are no longer displaced. They're just Gazans now. You meet one who's never seen a tree not wrapped in wire. He asks you what rain smells like outside the city. You lie and say, "Not much different." Then comes 1987. It starts with a traffic accident. An Israeli truck hits a car full of Palestinian laborers in Gaza. The funerals are crowded. The rage louder. Stones fly. Tires burn. And suddenly, you're watching the birth of the first Intifada. It isn't a war. Not officially. But it's not peace either. It's something in between, a grinding collective pushback. Youth with slingshots, soldiers with tear gas, women banging pots on balconies to signal danger. The uprising isn't just in Gaza, but here. It feels rawest, realist. You hear slogans sprayed on walls. You see makeshift barricades at night. And by dawn, they're gone, swept away, repainted, rebuilt. One afternoon, you pass a group of teenagers painting flags on the sidewalk. Red, green, white, black. They work fast. One gets paint on his shoes. He laughs, and the sound is strangely free. Historians still debate what the Intifada achieved. Some say it reawakened global attention to the Palestinian cause. Others point to the death tolls, the ruined infrastructure, the dashed hopes. Either way, it changed something permanent. And in 1993, a sliver of that change is signed in ink. The Oslo Accords. You watch the TV glow in a Gaza cafe. Arafat and Rabin shaking hands in Washington, D.C., beneath awkward smiles and hopeful cameras. Oslo brings promises. Phased withdrawal, self-rule, elections. You feel cautious optimism on the streets. A boy waves a small flag made from his father's keffiyeh. An old woman cries. No one asks her why. And indeed, in 1994, the Palestinian Authority arrives in Gaza. For the first time in a long time, it feels like the city might govern itself. There's fanfare, a parade, some new uniforms, a traffic light that mostly works. For a heartbeat, Gaza feels more than a headline. But peace is fickle. The settlements remain. So do the fences. Israel still controls borders, airspace, sea access, and factions within Gaza don't agree. Hamas, founded during the Intifada, gains strength. Clashes with Fatah begin, not just with words, but with bullets. By the early 2000s, violence returns. A second Intifada erupts, this one bloodier, more organized, more devastating. Bombings, retaliations, raids, grief becomes routine. One night, you walk past a building that once held poetry readings. Now its windows are shattered, and someone's written, "Tomorrow will bloom" on the rubble in spray paint. The irony is exhausting. And yet, Gaza doesn't vanish. It tightens, it remembers, it survives. But the modern Gaza Strip, the one with drones overhead, tunnels underground, and headlines on every news crawl, that version, it's almost here. The walls are not metaphorical anymore. They rise tall, thick, wrapped in sensors and topped with watchtowers. Gaza, once a coastal town where caravans paused for water, is now a fenced rectangle of history, heartbreak, and headlines. It is 2005, and the latest chapter begins not with fire, but with a withdrawal. That year, Israel removes its settlements from Gaza. You watch on television, stunned, as soldiers, Israeli soldiers, evacuate their own citizens. Some settlers weep, some resist, some leave behind graffiti that simply reads, "We'll be back." The international press calls it disengagement. The people on the ground call it something else. Too tired, too suspicious to believe it marks an end. Because Israel doesn't leave entirely. It still controls the borders, the sea, the air. Gaza is free, but fenced. Independent, but isolated. A paradox wrapped in razor wire. And then, elections. In 2006, Hamas wins the majority in the Palestinian Legislative Council. You're there when the results come in. Some cheer, others grimace. The political split with Fatah widens until it cracks. In 2007, Hamas takes full control of Gaza after a violent internal conflict. Bullets fly not between occupier and occupied, but between brothers. Fatah is pushed out. The Palestinian Authority is left governing the West Bank. Gaza is now effectively under Hamas, militarily, administratively, ideologically. The response? A blockade. Israel, followed by Egypt, imposes strict border controls on goods, electricity, fuel, people. The world calls it a siege. Israel calls it security. Egypt calls it unfortunate. You watch as flour becomes contraband, concrete a weapon, and school books something to be negotiated. Life shrinks. You meet a fisherman who's allowed just 3 nautical miles out to sea. Beyond that, patrol boats, warnings, sometimes worse. He doesn't catch much, but he keeps going. The sea, he says, is the only thing that doesn't shout at me. Then come the wars. 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, each with different names, each with the same patterns. Rockets fired into Israel, airstrikes over Gaza. Civilian homes, schools, mosques, none truly safe. You crouch beneath the stairwell and listen to the whistle before the boom. You wonder if this time it's closer. It always is. Between conflicts, there's rebuilding, sort of. You see kids play on the rubble of a school that was once rebuilt from rubble. Concrete blocks become soccer goals. A burned-out car becomes a classroom bench. You meet a teenager who's been through 3 wars and 2 birthdays. His laugh is too old for his face. International aid trickles in. So do reporters. They film the scars. They leave. The checkpoints remain. Yet somehow, impossibly, life pushes on. You pass a wedding where the lights are powered by a neighbor's generator. The bride's dress sparkles, even if the power doesn't last long enough for dancing. They're singing anyway. You walk through a hospital where doctors stitch wounds with silence. They've stopped waiting for resupplies. They improvise. They don't always win. You stop at a shop selling phone cards and dreams. A boy buys a SIM card and asks the shopkeeper, "Does this one work outside the fence?" The answer is silence. Historians still argue whether Gaza is a prison, a battlefield, a birthplace, a symbol. Some say it is unsolvable. Others say that's just what people say when they don't want to try. You sit by the shore at dusk. The Mediterranean rolls in, patient and exhausted. You close your eyes and listen to the gulls, the wind, the occasional rumble far in the distance. You feel history breathe beneath the sand. You wonder how many layers lie below, how many gates, gods, governors, and ghosts. You wonder how long a place can wait for peace. And just before you drift off, you hear a voice, soft, tired, human. We're still here. And now, as Gaza falls quiet beneath a moon that has watched every empire come and go, you let your thoughts settle. The sea still whispers against its edge. The wind still carries the scent of oranges and ash. And beneath it all, the city sleeps, fitfully, stubbornly, but still dreaming. Let your breath slow. Let the image fade. No more walls, no more maps, no more names shouted in anger. Just the worn stone of ancient streets, warm under bare feet. Just a clay lamp flickering softly in a window that has seen too much and still remains open. Remember the harbor, before the blockades, before the barricades, when ships from Cyprus and Crete docked to sell their fish and their stories. Remember the long caravans that passed through, heavy with spices, ivory, scrolls, and gossip. Remember the gods, the prophets, the scribes, and the rebels. All came through Gaza, all passed through, none stayed. But the city did. It always did. So now, close your eyes. Let the noise fade. Let the past rest. You've walked with Bronze Age merchants, watched Babylonian scribes sigh over tax rolls, dodged crusaders and trains and metaphors. You've survived 15 empires without even losing your sandals. Let Gaza sleep. Let yourself sleep. Because if this little strip of land can survive the weight of the world, then maybe you can too.